All right, so this is about as probably as far as I could go. I might be able to go a little bit farther. I don't think it'd be good for the tree to go any farther in terms of reduction. But it's interesting working this tree 5 years after Soliu, because that image is available online if you want to go find that demonstration image from this tree originally. But you'll see such a further degree of advancement in the design this time. Just taking those initial concepts and building on them. This is something that you don't often get to do in a demonstration. So to some degree, to say, like, I'm going to take a tree that I demonstrated on 5 years ago, and then I'm going to come back and demonstrate on it again. For some people, that's like, well, that's kind of lame, like, that's not very exciting. But actually, it's very interesting to engage with a tree you got to work on 5 years ago. Are your decisions still the same? Is the aesthetic still moving in the direction you thought it would? I thought I might be a little bit farther away from where I was at Soliu. I'm just really happy at how compact the apex has gotten and how much further we see the structure improving, and particularly really being able to rein in this defining branch, change that angle in all of those positions. And this is a monstrosity of a Mugo. This is a beautiful, beautiful tree. I wish I could take it home to the United States. The Sabina yesterday would also be very welcome at my garden in Marai, but unfortunately that's not the way that it works. Few things about this tree. There's this piece of deadwood out here. And whenever you have deadwood kind of out in space, I really want, as much as I can, to engage with that deadwood with the foliar mass. I don't find it to be, Tony's is something like that's a little bit different, right? Because that's telling a different story. But when you start to talk about more of the bonsai form, that deadwood just being out in the middle of space without foliage mass around it, it kind of gets lost oftentimes, or it's this isolated thing that you look at that doesn't have a connection to the tree. When you have these areas, you can frame these areas of interest with where you put the foliar mass, and all of a sudden, that is something that you push people's eyes towards. You're controlling their visibility of the high points of the tree. This is why we use foliage. This is how we use foliage to really dictate and guide people's experience with the tree that they're viewing, that we create. There's this piece in the back here that's not as beautiful. There's some ruggedness that we've highlighted right at the bottom of this pad. Your line of sight comes into that hollow. This hasn't been worked yet. This is something that would probably have to be machine worked because it's so massive and the wood is going to be very hard on a pine this old. That's something for the future, and definitely a big project that, if handled correctly, would take this tree, once again, another step farther in terms of quality and its potential to be something very, very special. But in general, moving forward, trying to figure out how would we handle the container of this tree, how would we treat this tree, etc. Okay, first of all, aftercare. Pines, when we have a tree that's that healthy and we reduce the foliar mass and we lay that all down, they already have all of their stored energy from last fall in the system. They had all of those tips that stored energy was going to be distributed across. We took off roughly 50% of those tips. So you have 100% of the energy from last year stored up that's going to be distributed across 50% of those tips. And what you're going to get is this massive push out because the tree was so big and so vigorous and so strong. I would expect this tree to outperform our expectations this year. Potentially a little bit of coarse growth, maybe too coarse. Maybe we need to pinch and kind of manage that so that we don't get too long of elongation and we get right back to where we just came from in terms of the tree being overgrown. Fertilization as normal. Obviously, we're not going to repot after a big, heavy piece of work like this because this it would probably be its first or maybe its second repot. So we're still in that danger range of having to make some significant native field soil reduction, and we want the tree to be really robust and built up for that. But when we do move to that repotting process, this is the kind of tree with this branch that's sort of bordering on that semi-cascade kind of, but it's not, but it is, but it's not, but it is, where a square pot that has some depth to it, some visual mass to it, maybe even some sharpness in terms of the angles of the corners and the presence of that real significant geometry in the corners would be very, very compatible for the movement of this tree, for the position of the apex, for that branch being so prominent in its asymmetrical push. I like that square container. You often see a square container for a really masculine cascade, semi-cascade, but you also have an upright form that can exist in a square container that's really interesting and unique. And I could see that being an option for this. If not, you could go with a standard rectangle, but you would want to go deeper, as deep as you possibly could and as narrow as you possibly could. That's what's going to complement this tree with a little bit more lateral movement and not that verticality that a typical formal upright or informal upright would have. You guys have any questions for me? Feel good? It's been great being here. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
So here's the tree finished. I said I was really, really lucky to get it in the right position. I didn't have to change any of the angles of the branches. You can see, compared to the root mass that was left after I trimmed it away, how much more substantial we've now got for the roots to grow. There's at least another 50 to 70% more area for that to grow into. It's very firm in the stone. Those wires that we put in, the copper wires and the screws, has really made it firm. And as you can see as well, because we built it up, you can't see any of the wires or anything else that's going on in there. The future development of this tree is just, filling out these. They will remain flat because, as I say, this is being blasted by the wind in this direction. And the comment that we had about this one sticking up, I don't see it sticking up that much, but you can see where all the roots where this tree has fallen over, and this has grown in the lee of the tree in the shadow area. So there's no live veins at all on this side, and that live vein there is nice that you can see it entering the ground. I always think that's important if you've got a tree that's heavily dead wood. It's important that you see the live vein entering the soil, because if you don't, what it can look like, it can look like a live tree that's planted behind a piece of dead wood. So I think it's important to see that live vein entering in there. Okay. Philip asked, is this bottom branch going to drop below the pot line? There it is. It's dropping below the pot line, which is quite nice, as I say, because this is probably a tree that was on the edge of a cliff. It's fallen over. So this can actually have more visual weight now because it's in the shadow of the edge of the hillside. But there we go. That's it. Finished. Thank you very much indeed.
So here we are, finished the juniper. We was able to create a nice compact tree, placing the different strong line in a different position, from the lower part up to the top. I stayed kind of tight in the right side to give a little bit more flow to the left, pushing down those branches that obviously will develop in the future. As you can notice, I was pruning a little bit more harder in the top because I had a lot of strength, and let a lot of runners in the lower part that this year will take off and create a little bit more lines and more thicknesses for the lower branches, especially in the back part of the tree. There was a lot of competition here from the upper branches, so the lower branches didn't grow as much as the upper part. So now that I have these runners, I can create a nice depth, especially in the negative space under the trunk. I can create depth using those branches. But I'm pretty happy about the final result. And I'm looking forward to see this tree evolving in the next year and coming back at the show one day, maybe with a different dress. Thank you. Thank you to my assistants.
Um, Akiyama was going to make an explanation about this branch, but he cut it off too quickly. So, he says thank you very much for sitting through the demonstration. So he had this branch on the front which we left unwired because he was going to cut it off at the end. And so the reason for the removal is to once again sort of highlight the movement of that dropping branch. So he's saying he's heard a lot about the trophy from other people in Japan and from sort of the internet and stuff like. But it's been an honour to be invited and to see the exhibition, in person and to be able to work here. It's been a really great experience for him. He's very grateful for the invitation. A few of the things that we were sort of talking about were that it's not been a tremendous sort of transformation because it was a tree that already had been sort of styled, uh, and so it already had like the skeleton structure of the tree already in there. So there wasn't like a whole lot that he could do to really sort of transform that. Um, but it's just kind of like a refinement process of the existing tree. So it's not been a massive transformation, but it's taken it a little step further. One of the things that he wanted to sort of say is that it had a great sort of imbalance in the sort of the amount of foliage on the between the sort of the lower branches and some of these inner branches in the top. The tree had clearly been left to grow just kind of like freely for a couple of years, and so that imbalance had occurred. And in terms of the kind of the branch removal and the foliage reduction today, what he's looked to try and do is to balance the stronger areas and the weaker areas, making sure that lower branch, which is going to be the focal point of the tree, doesn't get any weaker. And so the key for taking this tree forward is to build up the kind of the foliage density again, try and build up some volume to the foliage pads and get some health back into the tree. And to make sure it doesn't become a big bush again. Make sure that some of the space between the foliage pads and the branch structure is maintained to a certain degree, and it doesn't all just become one big green helmet on top of the trunk. The back branches in particular are a little bit on the long side, um, and wants to look at shortening that over the future. But they would cut back as much as they could. The back branches were the weakest part of the tree, and so it was cut back as much as possible. Um, and then waiting for the buds that are on the inside, just to sort of grow out and become a little bit stronger, start to bifurcate, start to turn, to have some secondary branches from those, and before sort of cutting back and then rebuilding some of the structure again.